Hello, friends. Welcome to Viewpoint with Media Shoots. Well, every industry has a part that people see and a part that actually makes everything work also. In media, we see the shows, the films, the content, but we rarely talk about how that content actually gets there. Isn't it interesting? And that's exactly what today's conversation is about. I'm joined by Mr. LJ Simpson, someone who spent years behind the scenes shaping what audience eventually watch across platforms like HBO, HBO Max, and Tubi. So LJ, really glad to have you here. Thank you so much for joining the session. Welcome.
Thank you, Sheetal. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
LJ, I was very curious to know when you means LJ as an individual look back. Was there a moment where you realized this is the industry you want to be in, or why you choose the media as an industry? How does this happen? And even if it is a media, people are fascinated about, for example, creation part of the business, but there is a deep inside, a deep story behind the acquisition part coming to the picture. But more to talk about the acquisition later, but just want to know about your journey first.
Sure. And thank you for asking that question. So, yeah, what kind of gravitated me specifically to the media industry and even more specifically film and TV was I've kind of always considered myself to be a very creative person. Back in high school and even like further back a little bit in middle school, I would always like do things like songwriting or write short stories or
Yeah.
kind of come up with these own narratives for myself. But I also had like a very much like an analytical side too, right? So I'm pretty sure a lot of parents say when you grow up and you're like looking for, prospective business or job opportunities, they want you to, do something that makes you happy, but also do something that pays the bills. So I've always kind of had this like analytical background in me. Originally thought I wanted to be like within like the engineering space because I was really good at math. But as I started kind of like coming along through my academic journeys, I learned that there was a whole analytical and mathematical side to the media industry, right? And so I wanted to kind of be able to have this whole balancing act between having these creative endeavors, but also, being able to use this analytical tool set and skill set. So I kind of, by happenstance, like fell into specifically the acquisition side of the business. I had one point when I realized I didn't want to be like an engineer anymore. I was seriously contemplating going to law school. So I had studied like all through undergrad with the idea of like becoming a lawyer, specifically around intellectual property. Like I said, like always dealing with ideas. And so when I realized early on, like I don't know if I specifically applied for a position or they saw my background having like worked at different like entertainment law firms and things of that nature, but my application fell into the category for the job pool for an acquisitions position at Turner Broadcasting. Being from Atlanta, Georgia, Turner Broadcasting is like really a pinnacle of the media industry in the Southeast, particularly in Atlanta. So I want to always kind of get my foot in the doors there. And like I said, like my job application fell into the role for acquisitions, and it was kind of like the culmination of everything I had been looking towards. By this point, I had kind of recently graduated from business school with a master's in business analytics, but I also kind of had that law training background, like having done undergrad within like, pre-law and everything like that. So it was a kind of the culmination of all of that stuff, like having studied media, having studied like kind of like the idea of law and also getting in that analytical space. And I loved it. Like it was just kind of like something, like I said, I fell into and is absolutely loved, and being able to work to bring this balancing set of creative and analytics to bring good content to people.
Interesting, LJ. You have very interesting like learning trajectory, but you started in law, and then, as you mentioned about the business schools and things like this. What did that law particularly? I'm very curious about this thing. The journey which like from the learning is law, then you move to media, then in between you are doing so many different things. You started in law. What did that teach you about content asset? Because that is a two very different angle. The law is a little different, the media is a little different, but still you are here. So how does that
Yeah.
happen?
To be quite honest with you, Shita, the law degree, like the idea of like studying law for me was more so something my mom told me is like, oh, you can do anything with a law degree, right? So it was just more so like the versatility of it, but it wasn't my actual passion. I think my passion was more so in the creative slash analytical space. That's the reason, like, I didn't end up going to law school, but I did end up going to business school. And so I think like that was kind of what kind of brought me more towards the media side of business. Was just like the law school, like the law background was just really nice to have, but it wasn't my passion. But it very much came and helped when looking at, particularly from the acquisition side, understanding contracts, understanding like the setup for an agreement, understanding, like how do we get as much rights retention as possible when dealing with particularly people's IP, right, and dealing with creative ideas. So I think that was kind of like the most appealing thing, kind of that helped me with that skill set.
Absolutely, at the intersection of creative and law, probably. I think it is
Mhm.
not just about the creative first. Creative is not always just about the creative. Of course, it is creative, but it's also legal first because what kind of content we consume, how it is being shown, all these things have it's a legal, uh, if I may use the word territory or the context, and that context need to be respected properly because lot many
Yes.
people are consuming the content, and if this content of course, creativity is the base. But beyond that, also, when people are watching some content, there are some different angles. So I think your education, your experience, your exposure to this direction is certainly going to be very helpful. And I think you are using this. But a very natural extension to this discussion comes to the very specific point that when you enter platform like HBO and TV, what surprised you most when it comes to the consumption style or the pattern of across the globe, and then acquiring the different kind of content? What how does that happen, and how you manage this thing? You
Yeah, I think
explain.
what interests me, yeah, I think what interested me the most between both platforms was kind of like their approach to content, right? And mainly like their approach to content was fueled by the approach to the audiences that they were serving. HBO, is kind of like the crown jewel of film and TV, particularly television. It has this very prestigious brand and has this high pedigree of like, they know television, they know what premium television is for audiences that are looking for that. Tubi, on the other hand, was more so, I will say, had a very democratic approach to their audiences, right? Like it's very much a very widespread, very accessible platform. That it being a ad supported streamer, so it has very little friction in terms of people being able to access it, and that in turn also kind of fuel what the content strategy was. So they're definitely what interested me the most was kind of like we were on two different sides of the spectrum, but both ensuring that they're bringing the audience, the content that matches the audiences that they're trying to
Right.
cater to. Yeah.
And Jay, uh, again, as a curious media professional, when we see different content being created, if you see India, for example, um, within India, there are different dialects, different regions, different set of people, different mindset, different personas. The way they are consuming the content is it's very different. And even this generation gap now, Gen Zs, Gen Millennial, and all this thing, everyone is having a very different taste and at the same time very different pattern for consuming the content, and that can be
Mhm.
bifurcated in terms of attention span, in terms of choices, in terms of their expectation from particular set of content. And with the explosion of different kind of platform coming into the picture, the acquisition process really becomes very different, or I think it is in a very interesting space. How do you look at this question? How do you look at this particular scenario that when it comes to supplying the requirement of consumption of different set of people, uh, what are the real challenges which you are facing?
No, that's an excellent question. And you're right. Like we have seen kind of like, as tastes evolve, whether it's generationally or like across like, geographic locales, whatever it may be, like we want to make sure that at the end of the day, we have the content that is catered to and satisfactory to whatever audience that we're trying to reach. I think that's the main thing, right? Like what do the audiences want and what are they expecting? Which is why you see like different strategies employed, as I mentioned, employed by different platforms. But at the end of the day, I think the difficulty is being able to one narrow down what is the actual strategy, right? Like there's instances in which you have very much niche platforms such as like just throwing it out there like a Crunchyroll, right? Like anime is in itself a very niche category, but then you have like you get a little bit more granular in terms of like different types of anime content. There's different types of format, but it's the idea of understanding like who your audience is and what strategy do you want to have to cater towards them, and then as you expand into broadening whatever the audience base may be, you might want to you take the learnings that you have from those very particular audiences, and then first see is there any type of correlation between the audience that you want to explore, right? So you'll see if there's any crossover potential there, and then with the findings that you have from one audience, you see you can translate that over to kind of gravitating towards a different audience. So at the end of the day, it's very much understanding what the audience is looking for, and also being able to go out and find the content that connects with them. I think that's the main thing. But I will say, like, we're also seeing a very much a globalization in terms of content interests. There are times now where like the idea of an audience could be so much different than what it was before. Right? It used to be like the idea of like, let's say, people who wanted to watch like hardcore action content. Like you had a very kind of in your mind what that audience looked like. It's usually like back in the day would have been like men who might be like a little bit older, like to say 40 to 50 or like late 30s to older, right? But now we're starting to see like this cross pollination in terms of like interest, right? So it's not just like a male dominated audience anymore. There's female audiences who are interested in action as well. So I think we're starting to see like the taste in general just kind of like branch out, which is also ultimately a good thing, right? If we understand that the narrative structure has appeal, then it's very much transferable to different audiences. So it's all interesting to see.
Because how I'm looking at this, so we, for example, we wanted to acquire some content. We are chasing for the content. Now, sometimes this whole process uh, reach to certain set of the natural extension. For example, we are reaching production houses or independent filmmaker, things like this, or who are creating the content. So we are reaching out to them, or they are reaching out to us. But do you think there are a situation when actually some very good stories are there, but unfortunately not having that bridge or that communication mechanism between the creator and someone who is looking for to acquire the content? Probably we are missing out on some good content. Have you experienced something like this, or what is the current way the whole acquisition process is going on? I believe there are some really very interesting stories, but unfortunately these people are not having access, or these people are not able to reach out to the right set of people, and that's a big gap. And when this happens, then the chain which allow to tell a story from one corner to another corner probably being missed or loosely connected. How do you see this scenario in today's context?
No, definitely. I've seen it happen plenty of times, right? Because to be honest with you, acquisitions teams are only but so large, right? So you have like these individual people who are tasked with, finding, like you said, like these stories, and things honestly do get overlooked. But that's when we depend on distributors and aggregators. Like they go out and kind of be our our first pass, like our boots on the ground, right? Either they have like a very specific niche that they're looking for, or they're like, they might have like a little bit of a wider viewpoint in terms of looking for certain types of content, but they're able to kind of like, package that for us and then come to us and say like, hey, we've been in the market, we've been, at these film festivals, we've been in these circles, we've spoken and connected with these filmmakers, and we've come across this great content. We want to be able to, be the conduit that brings it to you, the platform, right? Or to you, the buyer. So yeah, we very much do depend on those distributor conversations with like, people like media shippers to kind of be, like I said, be our boots on the ground, because we can't be everywhere at once. And there is, we want to make sure there's a good story that's out there that we want to be able to bring it to the masses. So yeah, we definitely depend on those relationships.
I was also curious then when we talk about the content, and when we create content and we want to sell this content or reach out to the platforms, SWOT platform, this TWOT platform, AWOT platform, and the fast channel and all this. I'm sure there must be very different strategies for the acquisition of particular set of things. That if I want to acquire for S4, my strategy may be very different, or for reward it might be different. from an industry expert standpoint of view, I want to understand your view on this thing. That how do you look this thing? If there is a content X or content Y, is there any particular rule that this will be getting fit in S word? This is probably good for A word. How does that happen? Can you please elaborate on that and guide the audience?
Yeah, so honestly, like you said, like there's different platforms have different strategies. And at the end of the day, it all goes back to like, what audiences are going to be reached and what audiences are going to engage on that respective platform, right? You mentioned like, specifically TVOD, you mentioned AVOD, you mentioned fast channels. TVOD, for those who don't know, is like a transactional video on demand, right? Those are people, that model typically, you're paying for access, for on-demand access to a program at any given time, right? And you're paying for like that one time for access to that film or to that series, right? And in comparison to like the other models that you mentioned, that's very much a premium thing, right? People who are willing to rent at that given moment, or people who are willing to put money or currency towards watching a certain thing, right? That's so that there's a implied premium with that. So that means usually the content that we're looking for tends to be very premium, right? It tends to be those things like, let's say, do we believe that whoever is viewing this is willing to spend money at this time to watch this? And so, like I said, there tends to be very much like the first window type of content outside of, let's say, if it's a film, outside of a theatrical release. That tends to be like the very first window before it goes to any type of streaming platforms. That there's this transactional window there, right? With AVOD, most AVOD platforms are very much ad supported. So it might not be like any upfront, transaction involved with that. There might not be any subscription fee associated with that, but there is a degree within of like a degree of monetization there to where like we believe that a bunch of people are going to watch this because it's going to generate ad revenue, right? So that's a different type of thing there. And then there's fast channels, which is a lot of people can get confused about this one, but it's also ad supported. But in most instances, when people talk about fast, they're talking about kind of like what you're typically accustomed to with traditional cables or like like a linear stream, right? Is essentially a channel that might be either single IP focused or single niche, or it might be responsible for a particular genre. But it's essentially like a pre-programmed stream of programming, whether it's like a stacked amount of episodes for like one particular series, or just it's a pre-programmed stream, right? And then that has its own different type of audience engagement and viewership patterns. So, like I said, you're looking at content that fits within each one of these particular models and will ultimately be the best in terms of monetizing for its respective platform.
And interestingly, when you are acquiring the content, sometimes it may be premium content, sometimes it might be volume-based content, sometimes it is just to fill this whole your programming circle, and then you are acquiring
Yeah.
different kind of content. What is the typical ratio? Is there any formula for this thing, or this completely depend on situation to situation, scenario to scenario? Because, for example, there are festival times coming. For example, there are particular occasion is coming. You might be planning from the programming side of the scenario that okay, this is the season, this is what we wanted to project. This is the scenario we want to entertain our customer in this way. We want to have this strategy for this thing. So there is a premium content and there is a scale, there is a different kind of lot of different kind of content is also there. I believe there must be a very smart balance about the acquiring the content. How does that happen, and what kind of strategy you are following in the direction?
Yeah. So historically, what I've seen is that it depends on the content, of course. But like for example, if let's say there's like a thematic event or like a stunting purposes, right? Ideally, for most of the kind of like the fast channels, so that's kind of like the idea of like a pre-programmed linear stream. You want volume, right? Because you're dealing with what typically is like a 24-hour schedule stretched across 7 days a week. You want to be able to make sure that you're able to fill that schedule with the amount of hours necessary that thematically fits whatever the stunt may be or whatever the initiative is. So fast channels tend to be very much a volume play, right? Thematic volume play. More so on the front end of that, like we mentioned, particularly like the T-bar or the transactional stuff. That's typically reserved for the high. The very much like the premium titles, right? Something that can drive a lot of eyeballs. Usually, like I said, this is maybe like a first window opportunity or something that's really really new, something that might have like very big names in terms of talent associated with it, something that's basically going to drive people to spending their money to watch it. Like they have to watch this now and they have to watch it at a premium, right? They're willing to pay for it. And then kind of within, like I said, we're dealing with these three models, particularly the AVOD portion kind of sits like in the middle of that, right? It can be voluminous, right? If you're particularly if you want to feel binge habits, right? If you like have like a lot of episodes, or something, because that the more of that engagement generates a lot of ad revenue. But it could also be something that's very premium as well. That might be like in a later window because it's still going to drive a lot of engagement, and engagement is the name of the game, particularly when it comes to ad revenue. So like I said, like it just depends on what ultimately are the strategies involved or the goals involved or whatever that particular initiative is. But each one is kind of approached a little bit differently depending on the economic model.
Absolutely. And in this scenario, how do you find that the AI is fitting into the scenario? Because a lot of content being created from the AI space, and now so many different content creators, and everyone is trying to pitch to different platform also. Now again, people and the audience typically they are also kind of ready for watching these content. So how AI is going to play a crucial role in this scenario? The AI filmmaking, AI content creation is playing a significant role when it comes to content creation part of the business. How the acquisition side of the picture is taking AI.
That's an interesting question. I haven't seen too much of AI integration from, particularly from an acquisitions content building perspective. For right now, like in the circles that I've been in, AI has typically been used as a tool, whether it's like organizing thematics, like theme lists of things, like in terms of like being able to uh, match, if we have an initiative or something of that nature, like what within a catalog will fit with that. But me personally, I can kind of like speculate that, as things kind of ask for more voluminous catalogs, maybe AI is used in those spaces to where, it helps you kind of create content quicker. Ultimately, we still want to make sure that the content is of quality. The term AI slop sometimes gets thrown around because we want to make sure that at the end of the day, it's something that's very much engaging and that people actually want to watch. Uh, but no, I think the jury's kind of still out on how much AI will be integrated a little bit, particularly in the acquisition process from a creative standpoint.
Right. And yet, one more question, and this comes straight from the angle that when I am consuming the content, at that time I have my choices, and I am looking forward to consume that content in different platforms on different devices, right? And when that one particular stage ended, when it calls for the recall or reconnecting for the same content, maybe the same content is available on different platforms. Now, in this scenario, if the same content is available to different platforms, different devices, is there any way to look for the better monetization opportunity for that particular piece of content in one particular platform? Or this is a very natural flow? How does we manage? How does we look at this scenario?
Make sure I'm understanding correctly. You're saying if the content is available essentially in different formats for different platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, and actually now that I think about it, I think that's kind of like the opportunity for AI there in terms of like adjusting things to specs to fit certain platforms, right? Where that will kind of typically historically been like a very tedious process. AI kind of can allow for things of that nature, and also it kind of just came to me too. I think there's an opportunity for dubbing, particularly, right? If you have things that are available that might be like in a certain language, and you might have be able to like use AI in a dubbing scenario to kind of like translate it into multiple languages, and then therefore make it available in different territories and for different audiences. I think that could be a really good use case for AI if it's done well, right? But I think that's a very good use for AI from an acquisition standpoint and making things available and acquiring different content. But yeah, no, I think there is very much an opportunity to kind of like be able to window things out into different platforms, and have things like formatted in a way that you're kind of expanding or extending the tail of its usability across different platforms.
Right. I think that's very important to understand also that the entertainment landscape is changing very way. consumption habits is always very unpredictable because people are different. We may identify the person, we may understand about the individual creativity and respect this thing. But even in the acquisition, very different kind of processes are we are witnessing. Someone in America or someone in Japan is consuming some content. It's a the acquisition process itself is a very at the intersection of creativity and technology, understanding, and so many things. It's itself is a very creative process because identifying some content for someone created by someone else is actually very different, very tough, and very engaging at the same time, very responsible job. So in this scenario, my question comes that uh, do you feel the industry need a better system in today's context? And if yes, do you agree? If not, then what are your views?
Yeah, I think there honestly needs to be like a more, I'll say like a more cohesive system, right? I think right now there a lot of different, to your point, there are a lot of different players in the market, right? There are a lot of people both buying content and distributing content, and essentially to meet the needs of each respective platform, it could require them to use like a different formatting or a different system altogether, right? In terms of that, and I think there might just need to be like a uniform standard in which like everyone's kind of like working within the same specs, within the same some same platform, because at the end of the day, it kind of makes it more of like a seamless process, right? If that kind of back end exists, because I think at the end, like ultimately, people or platforms want to make sure that they find content and they deliver that content to the audiences that not only want it but deserve it. And I think if we have the tools in place to make it as seamless as possible, then we should kind of go towards that route because it just makes everything a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely, because that experience, the frictionless experience, is very important for someone who is buying the content. Because a lot of time you observe that so many interesting things are coming on your way, but probably in the absence of that system or the infrastructure, probably the way we are consuming the content, we may miss out on some really very interesting piece of content. I think for me, it's very important to understand that if you had to explain the industry and the current scenario in one line or in your way, what that would be.
Oh, that's a good question. I will say it's very much like the wild wild west right now, right? I think there's like so much change that's going on, for better and for worse, right? We see everything from a lot of M&A activity, we see a lot of like consolidation of studios and of platforms. We see changes in terms of just different players, right? Like there are a lot of uh, creators and creatives who are like expanding more into larger brands, and then we see that kind of lead the way for other like independent creators, right? Who are looking for either distribution or like looking for like lucrative platform deals. I just think we're headed into a space where anything can happen and the rules are kind of like being rewritten as we go. And honestly, like it's a little bit scary because you see things like, unfortunately, as like a result of like all the M&A activity, like layoffs and a lot of the consolidation things happening. But I also think it kind of makes itself right for the opportunity of something else to kind of like flourish or like rise from the ashes within all of this, because people start getting a little more innovative, start thinking about things a little bit differently. And so it makes it like a very interesting landscape to see. So my one liner is that like we're in the wild wild west now.
Fantastic. I think in the intersection of possibility, opportunity, creativity, distribution, content creation, and this whole interesting entertainment landscape, there is so much new is coming and there is so much new is about to come. And everyone at every single point is going to witness all this. But thank you so much, LJ, for your time, because it's very important to understand that how this acquisition business is working, what kind of challenges you are facing, and beyond all this thing, how you are uh, helping audience to see the good content. LJ, thank you so much for your time, and look forward for your amazing process times to come, and wishing you all the success. Thank you so much again for joining Viewpoint with Media Shippers, Sanjay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shital. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So this is editor's note. We'll be cutting the series here, and now this is general conversation. Thank you. Hi LJ, thank you so much. I think this is really interesting because I wanted to keep it very crisp, specific, and to the point. I had my questions in my mind. Wanted to have another round, probably second way, but for my audience, I want to keep this good 20-25 minute package rather than 40 minute because I wanted to consume it very specifically, and that will do. But interesting time actually. In general, I'm speaking.
Yeah.
This is some really crazy works is going around. Like for example, Durandar, which I'm sure you must be aware about this thing, processed 2000 CR INR, and now initially it was into theatrical, and then later, now once it's come to Netflix, now there's a bidding process for that film in Indian context.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
if
Okay.
bidding for that, I heard this thing. So, if this is the scenario, then for content creator, this is an amazing chance because now they are actually, I feel they are actually start understanding the game of distribution a bit. And now from theatrical release to SWOT to other channels, everything they are start planning. In fact, in this case of Durandar, they have actually pre-release, and they actually even in theatrical they earn a lot, and that is
Oh,
interesting.
wow. Okay.
Earlier, the case was that the film got released on, let's say, on Friday. That's it. That is the window from where they are earning. That ticket usually sold at 500 or 600 rupees. For pre-release, one day, just one day before the actual release, they come up with this logic that okay, we are interested to show it as a pre-release and costing 1200 rupees. In that also, the filmmaker, the producer earns a lot. Crazy understanding about the content distribution. Everyone is trying very hard. And in this scenario, when I see there are possibility content make it or like earn this thing. Typically, filmmakers' problem is that it's my observation. I may be completely wrong. Also, they
No,
think
you're
that
good.
theatrical release is the best way. After that, it's SWOT. That's it. This is their window. But no, I think wherever there is a screen, there is a monetization opportunity. And this monetization opportunity need to be actually consumed very interestingly from them. So I don't know, like this is my view. I believe that it's the time for filmmaker production houses to understand about the distribution ecosystem problem when it comes to monetization of this thing. Imagine the inside entertainment. People are looking for that kind of content, but unfortunately, the makers are not looking that as a possibility. Is my observation. Well, like I'm sure you have a very rich experience. You have your own viewpoint, but curious to know that also.
No, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I'm actually speaking this week or this past week has been like the Atlanta Film Festival. I'm based in Atlanta. And I'm actually speaking on a panel this Friday about this very topic, particularly focused on distribution and kind of like, educating predominantly independent filmmakers on, what are their options as the landscape changes. And you're absolutely right. I think we're starting to kind of see independent filmmakers, particularly understand the idea of distribution, particularly around windowing, right? Like windowing is essentially has been like very much a lost art form. Um, I would say it's even been really much like kind of non-existent within like the independent space, but it's becoming more of a practice, particularly as you look at um, extending the long tail of monetization. So perfect example is that to your point, a lot of filmmakers used to think like, okay, if my film once it was in theaters, then it immediately goes to an SVOD window. But I know from like even the major studio standpoint knows that like that's not really the case, right? It goes from theatrical and then there's this TVOD window in between going like it doesn't go straight to a Netflix. It doesn't even go straight to like a HBO back in the day. It would go to like this TVOD or like this EST or electronic sell through window in which you're able to pay a premium price, right? Like just to rent the content in your home for like experience extended period of time. Either rent or own it. You can do either or. And that's something that's kind of like you said, it's starting to trickle down now even the um to the independence point, where even there's like kind of like pre-release to your very point, pre-release theatrical content. Like I know people who have pre-screenings of things before they even do wide releases. You're able to pay an even more of a premium to be the first, to see it in a theater, in a theatrical setting, but very much a premium, like a pre-theatrical window. Um, and it's like it all goes back to understanding who your audience is, right? There's people, I'll say creators have very strong audiences, and there's a subsect of that audience who's willing to pay this premium to have access to content first. And you have to really kind of tap into that market, tap into that audience, I believe, as an independent filmmaker, particularly to get the best and get the most out of the full life cycle of your content.
Exactly, because that is another point that we typically call about a UX, user experience. How does that
Yeah.
actually come? The user experience comes from the expectation of the user. That expectation is very different for every geography. And to top of it, that is also having the very different kind of bifurcation. A person in Africa has some expectation, a person in India has some different expectation. Then we have the platform, then we have the formats, then we have the channels, then we have the all different ecosystem. And in this whole scenario, it's so fascinating that opportunity window is huge, but unfortunately, it's being just consumed by very few. And unfortunately, the filmmaker is also not in that scenario, as in my view. Again, I may be completely wrong. It's just leveraging very few part of this thing. I feel it's a lot of scope in this market, but somehow that's not being analyzed by filmmaker. Acquisition managers are trying their best to provide them the platform, but the filmmaker is just limiting themselves just to the point that okay, this is my film, I'm done. Now, sometimes they are not even bothered about the producers, the recovery pattern. They just
Mhm.
creatively satisfied. I made this film and that's it. But I think that also need to be changed. I think. That is very important to change for filmmaker also.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think filmmakers, need to be, and this is kind of what I hope to do within my consulting is like basically educate you on like what your full options are within an evolving landscape, right? Because at the end of the day, filmmakers just they're really mostly concerned about yes, they want to make money, but they're mostly concerned about how do I move on to the next thing, right? Like how do I make this, get it to the audience, and then move on to the next thing. And I was like, you might want to stay on the part about the audience just a little bit more because you want to make sure you're not leaving anything on the table and make sure that you're gaining enough to where you're getting paid, but also you have enough to fuel the next project. And so you kind of have to help them and like you make them understand that like I've had conversations where um, there's like you said, to your point, especially with AI, I think AI can be very much used in a tool to help us maximize the effectiveness of the window of content, right? Perfect example. I've had conversations where like the idea of releasing a feature film, right, maybe in a theatrical window, and before it goes to like a streaming window, using AI to kind of frame it and package it as a vertical series,
Mhm.
right? And so you're reaching this vertical series audience of the same content. You're not changing anything. You're just kind of like just using it
Yeah.
to package it into like a vertical series,
Right.
get the response from that audience, and then after that re-synthesize it again in a different format. So where now like it's a streaming thing, right? Like, and it's the same content. You haven't changed anything, but you made it one essentially from a film to a series to back to like a film within its particular streaming window, right? And that's like all things that are different audiences, like you mentioned, catering to different styles, catering to different expectations from an audience, and maximizing and monetizing it on in every iteration of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is interesting, and I think this conversion last two question I might use in a reel in a stylish way because this is exactly bang on point which you just mentioned. Actually, these are the things which are really critically important, and filmmaker also need to understand this thing. Producer, I think, personal opinion, producers are the one who are who are struggling the most because they are a the financer of like in Indian context, producer is someone who is financing basically the creative
Yeah.
producer context, of course, there, but someone is investing and someone is chasing also for that investment
Mhm.
back, get the investment back. And then
Yes.
in between, he or she is trying to acquiring the content in terms of creatively from filmmaker, trying to sell it to channels. Then in between, always there is the scenario. Filmmaker is done with his film done. Now the acquisition team is also having their own understanding of liking according to the requirement, but the producer is the one who is at that moment is in the tough post situation that how to recover that money. I think this information is also important for producer to understand and like quickly get into that role, that it's not just to identify the right set of audience or right set of talent, it's also to understand the right set of distribution mechanism. And I think this has to be the part of cinema making also. Distribution is a very important game, and that needs to be
Hmm.
learned globally in a very right spirit. But thank you, yeah. Thank you so much, LJ. It was really, really, thanks for your time.